So this afternoon, dear friends, we are thinking of looking at some short suttas related to the connection between the Brahma Viharas and wisdom and good ethics. For those who are here in the room, if you would like to read along, we have copies of the numerical discourses here. For those who are on the Zoom, I'll be showing the screen. The first sutta I chose for you seems very lovable, but I thought it might be a little too short. So I have a second one as a backup that we can go to if we have enough time. Okay, this is called Ummagga Sutta, or the Astute. It's in the Book of Fours, number 186. Then one of the mendicants went up to the Buddha, bowed down, sat to one side, and said to him, "Sir, what leads the world on? What drags it around? What arises and takes control?" And the Buddha responded, "Sadhu, sadhu, bhikkhu, good mendicant. Your approach and articulation are excellent, and it's a good question. For you asked what leads the world on, what drags it around, what arises and takes control. Yes, sir. Mendicant, the mind leads the world on. The mind drags it around. When the mind arises, it takes control." So mind in this case is the citta. And I don't think the Buddha is saying that the world is unreal and only the mind is real or something like that. He's just saying the world that we can experience is controlled by the mind. Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. So I prefer to translate the word chitta as state of mind. So what the
Yes.
Buddha is saying here is like, say you're going along and suddenly anger arises in your mind. So your mind goes to an angry state. So that state drags you along. Now you have to do this. Now you have to do that. Now you have to do so many different things and various other states. I'm just giving that because it's sort of an extreme example. And so as states of mind arise in your mind, you feel compelled, to go along with those states of mind. Anyways, that's my opinion. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, Richard's sound is a little bit low. So the idea that the citta is the state of mind is supported in the Satipatthana, where they describe the chittanupassana, the mindful contemplation of the mind, is the mind which is affected by anger, the mind which is free from anger, the mind affected by sensual desire, the mind free from sensual desire. But when I give these examples, I try to be balanced and not always think of a negative example. So, like, if there was a moment and the mind was completely free of anger, that also is a powerful state of mind that takes, controls like what we experience and leads the mind in a certain direction. And as we'll see later in the sutta about the Brahma Viharas, bringing up the mind of the Brahma Viharas also has that power. It's true, though, that in this case, it has a kind of a negative, painful feeling like we're stuck in samsara with going around and around the merry-go-round or the roller coaster of up and down and round and about and coming to birth again and again. And what is it that keeps us stuck in this world, that drags us around and around in this world? States of mind, our mind. Yeah. Anything to add, Ayya? Should I go on? Okay. Next question. Saying, good, sir. The mendicant approved and agreed with what the Buddha said. Then he asked another question. Sir, they speak of a learned memorizer of the teachings. In Pali, that's a Bahusuto Dhammadharo. Bahu is great, Suto is listening, so one who has heard a lot. And that Dhammadharo is one who carries the Dhamma. Our Sangha is called the Dhammadharini. So we are in the feminine form, the ones who are carrying the Dhamma. And in this case, it's got a sense of one who's memorized. The Buddha says, good mendicants, your approach is excellent. Good question. He said, I have taught many teachings, statements, mixed prose and verse, discussions, verses, inspired exclamations, legends, stories of past lives, amazing stories, and elaborations. This is one of the ways that the teachings were classified before they were classified into the different groups of the suttas, the long discourses, the middle-length discourses, and so on. So he said, if anyone understands the meaning and the text of even a 4-line verse, and if they practice in line with that teaching, they're qualified to be called a learned memorizer of the teaching. So this should be encouragement for people who are not very skilled in memorizing, to think at least you should memorize something. Memorize as much as you can, but memorize something. And then if you've memorized it, you always have it with you. And anytime a situation arises, you can recollect what you've memorized, and that will help you. Or if you are having trouble going to sleep, you can recollect and remember the things that you've memorized. Or if you're waiting in line or something like that, or walking, you can also recite the things to yourself, the things that you've memorized, and that's also very much to your benefit. Then the next question. Sir, they speak of a learned person with penetrating wisdom. How is a learned person with penetrating wisdom defined? Good, mendicant. Your approach and articulation are excellent, and it's a good question. And he gives it in terms of the Four Noble Truths. The mendicant has heard this is suffering. They see what it means with penetrating wisdom. They heard this is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. And they see what it means with penetrating wisdom. I'll call on Richard again.
Thank you. That previous section the 4 lines,
Yes.
that's what Buddha's going to describe here, the Four Noble Truths. So, and you can tell that because at the end, I'm looking at Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, but at the end of a section, he says, that one is learned. And remember the previous thing is, a penetrative, how do you put it? What one, I can't find it. A learned expert, a learned expert. So it's that same concept. So, and that's why it says practice in accordance with that, because that becomes the practice of the Eightfold Path. Anyways, that's my opinion, but
Yeah.
it might be helpful.
You'll have to put the Four Noble Truths into a gatha or a poem in order to completely match, which I'm sure I know there are. They go to many a refuge, those who have been struck by fear. They go to mountains and trees and forests, those who have been struck by fear. But that is not a true refuge. That is not this refuge supreme. But one who has gone for refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha knows the refuge supreme. That I think this dukkha, dukkha samupada, dukkha satya atikama.
Arya.
Yes. Do you know that one?
Dukkha dukkha samupadang dukkha samas.
Dukkha satya atikama. Arya.
Riyanta tangikang matang dukkha pasamagamina.
There you go.
Etang ko saranang kemang etang saranang uttamang.
Etang saranang agama. Yes, so that's the verse. I hear a familiar voice here. Is that Venerable Satyama speaking?
Yes,
There you are. Wonderful to see you.
To see
I'm so glad
you.
you joined. Then this penetrating idea, nibbedika panyo. So that's also, I think, a moment of our practice. I think there may be stages that we go through where there's a gradual cultivation of the perceptions about these truths that are laid out, and then it could be that through our practice, through our really directing the mind, and it's like until we've penetrated it, it's kind of like a puzzle or a koan. I like what is the real significance of this, and then there comes the moment when the meaning opens up, and it's a tremendous discovery. And so that's my idea about the penetrating wisdom. For those who can't hear while the airplanes are flying by, if you wanted to move your chair closer, you could, or else you can just do your best. Okay, so then the next one. An astute person with great wisdom. How is an astute person with great wisdom defined? It's good. Your approach is excellent. A good question. Good question. And now this is the punchline for the point that I'm trying to make today. An astute person with great wisdom is one who has no intention to hurt themselves or to hurt others or to hurt both. When they think, they only think of the benefit for themselves, for others, for both, and for the whole world. That's how a person is astute with great wisdom. So this is the association of insight with kindness. You could say that this motivation or the intention, to have an intention is the che teti, which is related to like a chetana is a intention. it's related to the second point of the Noble Eightfold Path, the Samma Sankappa, the right thought, or the right intention. So if you understood the Four Noble Truths, it would be completely obvious, natural, and inevitable that the intention of renunciation, free from craving, of goodwill, free from aversion, and of non-harming, free from cruelty. Now, why is that? I'll stop share. Why is it? Why would you think that somebody who understood the Four Noble Truths would naturally develop the intention of not harming? I think I know. I have an answer, but I'd like to know your answer. Okay, Damon.
Well, in my own experience, to the extent that I can really understand the truths and experientially, uh my my experience is that it's just so aligns with, it's not just my suffering, it's the suffering of all sentient beings. It's not just my suffering. And there arises this empathy, and so that's the connection that I make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. If a person understands how pervasive dukkha is as a characteristic of this samsaric existence, that also you have to develop, if you can't develop compassion, when you really know how bad it is, how horrible the pervasive, prevailing totality of dukkha in the world is, you would go crazy. It would drive you to insanity if you were not able to transform it into compassion.
Mm.
So with compassion, you can see the way out of the dukkha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Or you could say that if you understand causation, that you would be scared to do a bad thing because you're scared of being reborn in hell. And, and if my Ayas, do you have an answer?
What comes to my mind, Sobhana, is how, like in our practice, we're developing sensitivity, and just to be aware of how we feel. Then when we approach something painful, some unfortunate intention comes up, then we feel the heat of it, we feel the impending pain and suffering of that. So we recoil from pain. We all want to be happy. We all don't want to suffer. So we follow our natural inclinations. And it's just that we become more and more sensitized to how we actually feel. And so we can be guided by that. And that keeps us very safe.
Yeah. So a person who is intentionally choosing toxic behavior or toxic thoughts is someone who's must be deluded, because they think it's something, they take something poison and they think it's delicious. That's a kind of delusion. But if you understand the Four Noble Truths, you're not deluded anymore. You see that poison for what it is. Okay, Maureen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've always thought that sukha is also the flip side of dukkha. It has the potential for suffering. So we always talk about dukkha, but sukha can be substituted as well as a way of suffering.
Yes. it's true, especially in terms of physical pain and physical pleasure, that sukha dukkha go together as opposites. But between the polarity between sukha and dukkha, it's like actually neither one of them is, like, sukha is not the answer to dukkha necessarily, but there's something which is transcending the merry-go-round of pleasure and pain, which is happy. I mean, they say that nibbana is the highest happiness. So nibbana is also sukha. And they say that merits also, that doing good deeds is sukha, that punya is sukha. So those things are very true. Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to jump straight from here into another sutta. Just give me a second and I'll make this one disappear. And then I'll bring up this one. This one is the Karajakaya Sutta, the mind-made body. And I'm going to make it have its very own screen and give it a full screen. And then I'm going to close this one. Okay. Now this sutta is more a little bit more difficult to understand. It's still in the numerical discourses. It's in the Book of Tens. It's number 219. Yeah, 219 in the Book of Tens. The Buddha jumps right in. He says, Bhikkhus, I don't say that intentional deeds that have been performed and accumulated are eliminated without being experienced. And that may be in this very life or in the next life or in some subsequent period. And the second sentence is, I'm just giving a second for people to find the page. What page number is it?
241, 219.
1541. Okay. Second sentence, and I don't say that suffering is ended without experiencing intentional deeds that have been performed and accumulated. Now, right here we have a problem because that sentence, besides being confusing to read with a double negative, it also seems to not agree with the other basic teachings of early Buddhism. And it sounds more like a statement by one of the Jain schools, who felt that one's karmic, one's intentional deeds create a dust or a stain on the soul that has to be solved either by ascetical practices or else by experiencing the result of those karmas that have been done. Bhikkhu Analayo says that he thinks that this is a transcribing error, and that what it should say is, I don't say that suffering is ended by experiencing intentional deeds that have been performed and accumulated. Meaning in the sentence, he's distinguishing himself. And now the third sentence is also a terrible problem. He says, that noble disciple is rid of desire, rid of ill will, unconfused, aware, and mindful. They meditate, spreading a heart full of love to one direction, to the second, the third, and the fourth. In the same way, above, below, across, everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of love to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free from enmity and ill will. And now the problem here is with the phrase, that noble disciple, which in Pali grammar you would never have an expression like that if it was not referring to a noble disciple in the previous sentence or the previous paragraph. Richard, hold that thought. I'm going to just follow a course of logic here. What is said by some of the scholars. Oh, the other problem with this sutta is that it doesn't list, it's in the Book of Tensa, but it doesn't give 10 things. So this sutta it's got some wonderful sentences in it. That's why I bring it out. But this sutta is quite confused. And if you compare it with a similar sutta and the agamas, we can come to the conclusion that actually this sutta and the one before were supposed to be combined together in one sutta. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the sutta before this, which is about intention. This is Sanchaitanika. Chaitanikas, that's intentions, or what's intentional. Now it's starting out with the same sentence with the same kind of a confusing double negative about karma. But what the Buddha is, he's definitely quite. It's perfectly clear to the Buddha that karma is a real thing, and that the intentional deeds that we do will have an impact in subsequent existence. But however, the way out or the way to liberation is through insight, not through either suffering from all of the ill effects of all of the previous bad karmas that you've ever done. Because with the number of previous lives you had, we were talking this morning about the wild predatory animals. So think, for how many lifetimes were you that wild lion or that wild tiger eating little bunnies, all day in and day out? And so how much evil karma did you accumulate during all those lifetimes? And if you have to wait until you've experienced the painful result of all of those deeds in past existences, you'll never come to the end of it. So that's sort of like the argument against the Jain idea. But then there's a different idea, and what he's developing in this is between the idea that the negative karma is limited and the boundless practice of the liberation of the heart is not limited. So that's the parallel he's doing. Okay, I'm going to pause here and take Richard's comment, if it's still relevant.
Thank you, Ayya. I have a slightly different way of looking at it.
Mhm.
What the Buddha is saying in the second section, but I do not say there is making an end of suffering so long as one has not experienced the result of volitional karmas that have been done and accumulated. what the Buddha is saying is that you've taken birth, this body. You have to experience old age, disease, and death, but you can still free yourself. You don't have to wait for death. Like some people think at death, I'll go to heaven or something, right? Like monotheistic type religions, right? No,
Uh-huh.
in this, right now in this very life, even though there's still suffering connected with this body that you'll have to experience. The Buddha got old, he got sick, he got injured, and he died. Okay, so you still have to experience that, but
Right.
that does not stop you from being able to attain nibbana.
Okay, well, that's a
Anyways,
a way
that's
to
my view, but thank you very much for listening.
If you read up about this particular sutta, you can see that there are several different ways of explaining it. I'll okay. I'm having a little technical issue for a second here. Was there another hand?
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
The question I have for you in this case is, it just struck me earlier when I read this that it sounds a lot like a Christian saying, well, even an evildoer, as long as he accepts Jesus on his deathbed, then he's excused from the consequences and he can go straight to heaven. So I'm having a hard time, I hope you could help me distinguish that attitude of, yeah, I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah. Well, within this very lifetime, the evildoer, even if they've become a fully enlightened arhat, they still may experience the results of their previous evil deeds. Just like Angulimala, after having murdered 99 people, still had the householders throwing stones at him and injuring him because they were so angry about what he had done, even after he had gained his enlightenment. Nevertheless, once you stop creating any more of the type of karma that's leading onto a rebirth, that's what the difference is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So now the Buddha talks about these three kinds of corruption, about the 10 unwholesome deeds. The three kinds of corruption: failure of the bodily action, that have unskillful intention with suffering as their outcome and result. The four kinds of corruption and failure of verbal action, that have unskillful intention with suffering as their outcome. The three kinds of corruption and failure of mental action, that have unskillful intention with suffering as their outcome and result. So this is being set up as like a set of opposites. So one end of the spectrum are these kinds of corruption, and then in the subject sutta that is coming after this, the practicing the Brahmaviharas is the opposite end of the spectrum. So those two things are being set up as contrasting pairs. Now this gives the explanation that one who has done these 10 kinds of corrupt deeds, when their body breaks up after death, sentient beings are reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, the hell, because of these three kinds of corruption. And the three kinds of bodily, four kinds of mental, four kinds of verbal, three kinds of mental corruption. Then that's contrasted with the 10 positive courses. A skillful intention with happiness as the outcome and result, which is the opposite kind of bodily, verbal, and mental acts. So now I've just skimmed over this. I do have another sutta that goes and gives a full explanation and a full definition of the 10 courses. But I want to return to the body born of deeds, and if we have time, we could go a little bit more into those 10 courses of unwholesome action. But now, having set up the unwholesome or the wholesome courses of action, then that's the opposite. There's doing merits or doing demerits, and then there's something that transcends both of them, and that is when that disciple is rid of desire, rid of ill will, unconfused, aware, and mindful. They meditate, spreading a heart full of love to one direction, to the second, to the third, to the fourth. In the same way, above, below, across, everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of love to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. Now, this is a very important sentence. They understand, formerly, my mind was limited and undeveloped. Now it's limitless and well developed. Whatever limited deeds I've done don't remain or persist there. I don't quite think that the Buddha is saying that one can obtain nibbana by doing a lot of merits or anything like that. There's a few verses that you can find in later Buddhism or at the commentary level that seem to say something like that. But we believe that perhaps with the jhanas that one can draw close to nibbana, but that the final step is a step of insight, not merits, but this boundless, limitless goodwill is set in a contrast to the limited effect of our previous bad deeds. A person who only has 1 teaspoon of loving kindness, and if they put a 1/4 teaspoon of salt in a teaspoon of water, it will still be very salty, very almost maybe difficult to drink. But if their loving kindness is as large as 10 gallons or 40 gallons, and they put a 1/4 teaspoon of salt into it, it doesn't have very much impact. So it's in that way that the merit of the boundless Brahmavihara practices can mitigate the effect of our previous unwholesome deeds, if we had any. That's my, and then instead of a large 40-gallon of water, if it's like a boundless ocean that has an infinite amount of water, that would be like in this state of awakening. So one who's gained the goal, or who's gained noble attainment, they would have had some unwholesome karmas in their past karmic stream because they're a human being. And so you can't be a human being without having some mixed karmas in your past. But the Buddha is saying is that those mixed karmas, or those unwholesome karmas that you had in your past, do not define you. They do not permanently prevent you from realizing. I'm going to ask again, invite whether Ayya Brahmavara or Venerable Satima has anything to add to this idea.
I'm just reminded, Ayya, of the story of Angulimala and how he was the serial killer, as probably you all know. So he'd killed hundreds of people, and then he became an arahant, and just how his extremely unfortunate karma was then sort of mitigated by his insight. So he still had people throwing stones at him and people who were really upset with him because he'd killed their mother or their family member or whatever. But his suffering was so much reduced. And the Buddha said to him at one point, didn't he, Ayya Sobhana, bear up, Bhikkhu, bear with these stones being hurled at you and these insults. This is fair enough, considering your past in this very lifetime. But Angulimala himself practiced when he had the insight and he'd become fully liberated. He practiced loving kindness to a great degree. And so it's a beautiful example of just what you're saying, Ayya.
Calling on Richard again.
Thank you. I think this is also can be seen as like the two arrows of suffering that we all will experience if we have a physical body, pains and difficulties and stuff like that. But that's the first arrow. But the second arrow is how our mind reacts to it. So, the more enlightened, a person, the more enlightened they are, the less their mind is going to react to those sorrows. So that's one of the reasons why it doesn't have as great an effect. And if one attains nibbana, then one probably won't, not probably, but one won't react at all. It doesn't make a difference at that point.
I'm going to go and read on a little further. What do you think, mendicants? Suppose a child had developed the heart's release by love from their childhood on. That's a metta ceto vimutti. So this is a very important idea, and it's not considered by the scholars or the commentators to be nibbana, but it's a very wholesome, positive state, which is putting the mind on a like in the pattern that's ready to wake up. So it's the mind has been released from all kinds of reactivity. This is another definition. I think Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote it someplace that how karma creates its result is that in the mental continuum, there's a certain pattern of reactions that has got sort of like a repetition syndrome. So like the same trigger always causes the same result. And if the mind has become habituated and learned to react in that certain way, then it becomes self-fulfilling kind of synergy. And having done an unskillful thing one time, or having done an unskillful thing 3 times, then it can become an addiction that is like repeating itself over and over again. And so then the compulsion to keep on repeating is the thing that's broken by wisdom, or in this case, the statement is broken by the liberation of the heart through loving kindness. Breaks that repetition compulsion. So would a child, I see Analayo has a hand. Please, Analayo. Oh, your sound.
I've been following along Bhikkhu Bodhi's, the book, and reading the notes, that he has at each of, often at the end of the paragraph or the whatever. And, he's saying here, or may I read one from 2187? That's the one you just did. As pointed out earlier, the Pali word karma bears two senses, often difficult to distinguish. The etymological sense, simply an action or deed, and the soteriological sense, a deed considered as a moral force that can bring retributive consequences. It is strange that the text says unequivocally that one who develops the liberation of mind by loving kindness can do no bad deed. It seems to me that although such a person might not commit bad deeds motivated by hatred and ill will, they could still do bad deeds, even minor ones, motivated by greed and delusion.
Mm.
And he goes on, each one, it's like this, did I hear you say in the beginning that this is one of the later, or there's some question of whether this sutta, or this series rather, the tens, is like a later compilation or something where there may be strains of other things in it, like you mentioned James at one point.
Yeah.
Because in all of his notes here following along, he has very clear things about descriptions trying to clarify how things fit together and what the specifics are for each of these things. So I'm wondering if that's he does, he has notes, of course, throughout, but this particular one seems to have lengthy notes. That's just my.
Mm-hmm. Well, this sutta possibly was truncated or mixed up or incomplete, or something happened in the transmission of this sutta. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that there's a couple of phrases in this sutta that are actually not easy to understand. And the commentators have given a variety of different interpretations of some of them. And so whether that means it's early or whether it means it's late, I don't have an opinion about that.
The only other things in this is that he does mention, of course, that the preceding sutta and this one seem to be like they should have been the same one. And he says that in the Chinese parallel in the Agama 15, which is it's a synthesis in this, that that version doesn't quite have this separation or this kind of a, it is merged together in some way that perhaps makes it more, clarifies it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Let's go ahead with this. So suppose this child has developed the heart's release by love from their childhood on. Would they still do any bad deed? No, sir. Not doing any bad deed, would they still experience any suffering? No, sir. For if they don't do any bad deed, where would suffering afflict them? And again, here already it's kind of could be confusing, because if someone is a human, they took a human birth. And so they must have some kind of karmic inheritance that caused them to take a human birth, which is kind of a mixed bag. And a human being is subject to old age, sickness, and death. So it even a child who was completely loving and so on, would experience those things, and whether they would naturally develop the wisdom that they could be imperturbable in the face of confronting old age, sickness, and death. It's not exactly clear. But he says this heart's release by love should be developed by women or men. And then neither women nor men take this body with them when they go. The mind is what's inside a mortal being. And this phrase here, Chittantaro ayang bhikkhave macho. A macho is a mortal being. And then chitta, antara, the mind inside. This mind inside. This mind is inside of a mortal being. There's quite a lot of commentary trying to explain this. Would somebody like to read Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of this one line? It's neither the heart's release should be developed by women or men. Neither women nor men take this body with them when they go. The mind is what's inside mortal beings. Do you have it? Okay. All beings have mind at their core. Piatan says, all beings have mind in the middle between the past and the future. This is one of the commentators. And so the only thing we have is the mind in the present moment, not the mind in the future or the mind in the past. So that's another way that this line is interpreted. Yeah.
Dictionary says chitantaro means having the interval of a thought moment.
Yeah. Okay, so that's in agreement with the commentarial explanation that I just mentioned. So the mind is just there for a moment. So you don't take the body with you when you go. The mind is just there for a thought moment. They understand whatever bad deeds I've done in the past with this deed-born body, I will experience here. It will not follow me to my next life. So this is like the Angulimala. He can experience it here. But whatever those results are, he knows that it's not following to the next life anymore. This deed-born body, this karaja, kayena, is also a bit of a pun. The karaja, one meaning is like the physical body that comes from semen, and the other is a physical body that comes from a previous deed. So the kara means deeds and actions. So what's produced by our previous actions, or else what's produced by human reproduction. So whatever deeds I've done with the past with this this body made of meat and covered with a bag of skin, with a lot of different kinds of juice inside. This is where we get to experience those results, and we can bear them patiently, those unpleasant results, or else we can gain the wisdom to become imperturbable, completely beyond any clinging, so that the things that we experience with this body of meat are not able to cause any disturbance whatsoever. One has gotten to that stage. The heart's release by love developed in this way leads to non-return for a wise mendicant who has not penetrated a higher freedom. And then I'm just going a little bit further than Colin Richard. They meditate spreading the heart full of compassion. They meditate spreading the heart full of rejoicing. They meditate spreading the heart full of equanimity, to one direction, the second, the third, the fourth, the same way above, below, across, everywhere, all around. They spread the heart full of equanimity to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. They understand. Formerly, my mind was limited and undeveloped. Now it's limitless and well developed. The mind is what's inside of mortal being. Whatever bad deeds I've done in the past with this deed-born body, I will experience here. It will not follow me to my next life. The heart's release by equanimity developed in this way leads to non-return for a wise mendicant who has not penetrated to a higher freedom. I'll stop the share and call on Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. Yeah, that idea about the mind being inside, or Bhikkhu Bodhi says mortals have mind as their core, but that
Yeah.
chitantaro can also be translated as crossing over. So it seems more like the Buddha is saying that people cross over to another birth based on their state of mind. At least that's my opinion. Anyways, maybe that's helpful in trying to understand, what the Buddha is actually saying there. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Well, this sutta is can be confusing in some ways. The reason why I brought it out is because this is a sutta that makes the connection between the wholesome and unwholesome deeds and the practice of loving kindness. So the practice of loving kindness does not only mean a cushion practice, it also causes a psychological transformation, which actually the claim here is that it makes it, that transformation through loving kindness makes it impossible to do harmful deeds or to have harmful intentions, or you could say impossible to be overwhelmed by harmful intentions. And is it possible to get to that where it's impossible to do a bad deed? Certainly. We know that even one who's just a stream enterer is said to have the sila, or the ethics, which are beloved by the noble ones. And a person who has a stream entry would naturally refrain from the 5 precepts. It would be very difficult to get a noble person to break one of the 5 precepts. And if you examine yourself honestly and you say, you know what, it's really easy for me to break precepts, then you can just be realistic and say, okay, I have not yet gained the noble path, if that's still the case for me. And then for the further stages of awakening, then there are further, statements about the kinds of unwholesome evil deeds that are actually impossible to do. So it's not just that they are beyond good and evil in the sense that they can do bad things and get away with it. No, that's not it at all. It's that there's been such a profound psychological transformation, such a profound mental transformation, that they would not anymore even form the kind of intention that's creating a karma, taking them onto a rebirth. And that's how they realize their freedom. I mean, how delightful it would be if you no longer had to spend, who knows what percentage of your brain cells are involved in resisting temptation and trying to be good, and then you wouldn't need to spend that brain energy making all that effort, because it would be natural for you. So your wisdom and your natural goodness would be going together. Okay, I think I'm going to ask her again. Maybe she's going to read another footnote.
I am, and it is just clarifying or just making simple this very important reflection that you just gave us. This is number 2191. By means of loving kindness, the feeling that would have been experienced upon rebirth is cut off, and thus it does not follow one along. This is the reflection of a noble person who is a stream enterer or a once returner. Presumably, the bad karma is all to be experienced here in this life and will not follow along, because the next rebirth will be in the form realm where there is no painful experience, and they will attain nibbana in the form realm without returning to this world. But I really, really liked what you said about if one has reached the place of really abiding by the 5 principles, that goes such a long way along the path, that if you've really reached the point where you simply don't have a question about violating, it just doesn't even come up anymore. The importance of that and the steadying of the mind in the pathway, when you realize that's you're at that state, that it is no longer attractive or something that even comes up. So thank you very much for clarifying that last piece.
Okay. I'll read a comment here by Anagarika Mitakanti, who mentioned that someone who regularly practices the mind's release by metta since childhood might be too blissed out to really suffer in any significant sense. Well, it could be true. I've had experiences in longer retreats that were extremely blissful, and after actually not such a long amount of time, there was something that was in me that was saying, is this all there is? And so blissful is more beneficial for practice, I think, to be blissful than to be stressful, for sure. But blissful could be like a launching point for all of the other good factors of the path, like for the energy investigation of states, tranquility, and concentration, and so on, for those factors to really pick up and gain momentum from the platform of the blissful state. But the blissful state by itself, it I don't know that that's means that a person wouldn't suffer. A person who doesn't have wisdom, who happens to be successful in meditation and has a blissful meditation, then eventually that meditation has to be over. And if they didn't have wisdom, then they can feel sad and sorrowful and lonely and depressed because they want the state to get back the state that they had before. This sometimes happens with people who are lucky as like a beginner. They go on a retreat and they get amazing meditation. And then afterwards, they're not able to get it again. And they can spend a long time really being sad because they can't get that good experience that they happen to get by luck on an early retreat. So in every case, wisdom or insight and ethics and loving kindness all turns together. They all go around together. They belong together. That's my idea. Brahmura, do you have a sermon to give now that you've heard this one?
I'm just really appreciating these suttas, Ayya, and this encouragement to recognize the power of the Brahma Viharas. And what comes to my mind, I'm just reminded of my teacher, Goenkaji. He would say, if we want to realize the truth, we have to plow through the entire field of suffering. And the sense that we can't escape, the results of karma. And yet, the Brahma Viharas give us this enormous protection and sort of cushion the blows of the unwholesome karmas from the past. And so what I really feel at this point, having taken in these teachings, is how important it is to cultivate loving kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity in relation to our experience. Because when we bring them in, like the person from childhood, when we bring them in, then we are able to open to the suffering that might be there. And we have the resources, to face up and to kind of experience the suffering, but experiencing it without the full reliving the full impact. Like, we don't have to relive the suffering exactly as it was, but we do have to touch into that suffering and experience it internally. And with loving kindness, with compassion, it makes it possible to trawl through the dukkha that may be there for us.
What you're saying reminds me of the value of right effort in having the energy so that when dukkha arises within us, or when we become aware of dukkha, that then we've got both the knowing how and also the willpower to take care of it. Not just to sit paralyzed and stressed out, but instead to take care of that stressful state, and to know that it's possible. The Buddha was the great physician, and he gave us many remedies that we can use at home to overcome any kind of negative state. I'll call on Maureen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It just seemed to me that all these states are conditioned. And like I was saying earlier today about sukha has the potential of being difficult if you don't see it and try and deal with it as it really is. I don't know that I've explained it very well, but that's my take on all this. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now I need to call on Venerable Kachayana to give her sermon about this theme.
Mhm. Okay. Hmm. See. Um, yeah, I guess it's just connected back in other suttas. They have the simile of the salt in a cup of water. And if you put salt in a cup of water, it will taste salty. But if you put the salt in the river Ganges, you won't taste it if it's the same amount of salt because there's just so much larger. And so I think this sutta is sort of, it's saying the same thing, is that whatever unskillful states might drive one to commit a bad deed, um, whatever suffering there may be related to that, it's just sort of insignificant in comparison to the broadness and expansion of the mind that is that has developed these states of Citta Vimutti through the Brahma Viharas. So, in that simile, the salt is still there. But the effect of it is just, insignificant at that point. But it's also not the same as awakening, because the salt is still there. And, even if one is blissed out, even if one is living in a heaven realm, still that's a state that does have dukkha in it because it's a state of existence, and it will end at some point. So, I appreciate this sutta sort of drawing that out, like really seeing the great benefits of developing these states. Um, but yeah. But then I think maybe I want to ask you if you could circle back to that line from the previous sutta at the end about the astute person with the wisdom not wanting to do any harm. And because that is, I think, the awakened one, not just somebody in a state of Citta Vimutti, I think, in that sutta. What do you think about that?
Certain, certainly with levels of realizing something noble, possibly at all the levels, that tremendous parts of the potential to form a hostile intention drops away. The Buddha was constantly living with his intention for what was beneficial to people. And it was for that reason that he wandered across India for all those subsequent decades, teaching many different kinds of people in skillful ways. And he spoke in a way that was kind of firm. There were a couple of occasions where in one occasion, the Buddha dismissed a group of rowdy, misbehaved bhikkhus because they were too misbehaved. And Sariputta was there, and Sariputta just stood and watched. He didn't do anything. And later the Buddha gave Sariputta a round scolding and said, you were supposed to take care of them and to lead them out of their misbehavior and to train them about how to behave themselves properly. So he's saying it's not what one who's awakened would not rightfully just be passive and do nothing. But one who is awakened should, if they have a thought, the thought should be for the welfare of beings. And then that's followed up with action. And the Buddha, it said it again and again that he's given these teachings for the benefit of gods and humans, for the benefit of many generations. And then there was another case where Venerable Ananda didn't bother teaching when he could have. He was supposed to, but he didn't bother because he was, I guess, blissed out or into being quiet. And again, the Buddha said, no, you're supposed to teach. And the Buddha said again and again, if you misrepresent what the Dhamma is, what the teachings are, that's for the harm of beings, for the harm of yourself. It'll have repercussions for a long time. So it will be very harmful to you and very harmful to beings if you misrepresent the Dhamma. And so the Buddha was quite motivated that, properly and clearly realizing and expressing the Dhamma in a way that's manifesting the path that was handed to us is what we should do. So we should be active. But in that case, those were enlightened disciples who failed to do what they should have done, who were negligent in doing what they should have done. So I think it might be possible for even an enlightened bhikkhu to sometimes miss the mark in terms of knowing just what to do in every circumstance, to apply that skill as a teacher, that it's only a Buddha who really has got this uncanny ability to know how to use the skillful means to convey the Dhamma in any kind of circumstance. Now the time is going by, and I wanted to give a chance for more, a couple more voices. I know there were some hands up that then they went down. Maybe you are tired of waiting. I see Satima's brought her picture in. Are you willing to say any more words about this particular sutta?
Greetings, Ayya, and to everyone. I'm really appreciating the sutta very much, and appreciating the applicability of the Brahmavihara, in each moment, rather than feeling like we have to wait to develop the Brahmavihara in a far off place. I find it very useful to see when an unskillful thought or emotion or something is arising, to recall the line from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. So when I think about that mind state as being a living being, or that thought as being a living being, or whatever is arising is a living being, and bring that quality of care and wholesomeness and tenderness, and it's okay. It's okay. It's happening out of causes and conditions, and I can be with this in a way that's wholesome, even if the thing that's arising is unwholesome. So just appreciating how the Dhamma can be applied in each moment. Thank you very much for this really beautiful talk and beautiful sutta. Thank you, Ayya.
Okay. Now we can close out this program by giving respect to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Aram Samba Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantan Abhivademi Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Subhatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namani.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Ayas.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.